Fine. So welcome to this second thematic session in this room called Tourism Multiple Footprints, Impacts on Environment and Communities. I am Antonio Paolo Russo from University Rovira i Virgili here in Catalonia. I will be the moderator of this session, and I'm very happy to introduce to you briefly the panelists for this session. So we have Harry Kokosis from University of Thessaly, and also representing a project that is called Co-Evolve, José Antonio Donaire from the University of Genoa in Catalonia, and also Vice Rector for International Relations of that university. Michael Grelot, postdoc at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, presenting and representing the project Blue Islands here. And then Carolina Pozzi from the region Lazio in Italy, talking about the coasting project, and Gianluca Saba from the municipality of Genoa that will present the project Alter Eco. We already heard a presentation in the first session in this room this morning, but more focusing on the case of the city of Genoa. And just let me say, so we have a mix of public officers, researchers, gurus, and I'm really very happy to have met again after many years Harry Kokosis, who, if you are in the academy, is one of the gurus, the first guru I met in my academic career. And he's got also this very interesting profile of being both a very important expert and researcher in tourist studies, but also having had very important responsibilities in tourist management and planning at the national scale in Greece. So I will do a very brief introduction to this session, and then I will give the words to the panelists, and we hope, even though we are not very strong in keeping times, but we really hope that we have time for debate at the end, so I prepared some questions. And also, I should tell you, you have the possibility to do your own questions. You have this app, the event app, where you can do the questions, and we will see your questions on the screen at the end of the first part of the session. So I will pick those questions between yours and mine, those questions that seem to me more relevant, and give it back to the speakers and also to the audience itself. So entry points, and I'm going to put my first slide here. Sorry. As tourism scholars, and I include now those of us who are tourism scholars, but there are many others in the room. Some of us, we have been working for ages on analyzing, calculating tourism externalities, talking about sustainable tourism, indicators of cost and benefits related to tourism development. We have been doing it since the 80s, and some of us get a little bit nervous when they have to participate in debate where speakers say, hey, we have a problem with sustainable tourism. We say, yes, we know it. But this knowledge, and we are guilty to some extent of that, has mostly stayed in the academia. And even when these concerns have broken through to the public opinion, and we have a lot of cases that we have been studying over the years, at least since the 80s, of Venice, a worst case scenario of tourism development, displacing anything else, islands like the Greek islands, maritime environments, natural areas and parks. But all these cases have always been treated as the exception. And it has not been matched by equally urgent initiative in the policy sphere, or by altogether change in planning concepts and management frameworks. So here we are again, after 40 years of this debate, in a slightly changed scenario. Why do we speak today about over-tourism as in the first session? Why do we speak increasingly frequently? This must have been the 10th event of this type in Barcelona this year, where academics and policymakers are reflecting about this issue. Tourism has mostly been policed under a pro-growth paradigm, and more recently, in the last, I would say, 10 years, with an approach that looks at sustainability, the sustainability fix, as I would call it maybe later. So, what has changed then in this last few years that has put very solidly the effects of tourism and mobilities under scrutiny of policymakers, of the public opinion, of the media, of political institutions from the local level to the European level. And my take, but I'd like to hear also your opinion about that, and that's actually one of the questions that I will give back to our speakers, is that there are two factors involved. First of all, there is obviously an issue of physical and social limits having been surpassed in a much larger variety of places, and also more powerful places, more resonant to the public opinion and policy. Not just the peripheries of Europe, not just the exotic places where if thing goes wrong, that's picturesque, but we don't really care about. But the fact that over-tourism has arrived in the big cities of Europe, in the centers of power, in the most populated places, has triggered a reaction. And we are living in the wave of that reaction. My second opinion is that the economic crisis of the 2000s that maybe all the countries represented in this room has suffered in first person, has hit particularly on tourist Europe, and to some extent has exacerbated the polarization in society when it relates to tourism, and aggravated the resentment of resident populations, and also highlighted the need to tackle tourism as a booster of social exclusion. And I'm not just talking here about the environmental effects of tourism, I'm also referring to the social effects of tourism. And we heard some of these from the presentation of Maria Gravari in the first part of this session. So, where is my presentation? Yeah. Can you put back my presentation, please? So we are witnessing fundamental changes in the technology of tourism, and this is a very important technology of tourism mobilities that are limiting the reach of traditional strategies to control, regulate, and deactivate its tourism potential. This is a point that was already done by Claudio Milano in his introduction this morning. The issue here is that the leverage of traditional policy approaches on the operation of the tourism industry and the management of its local effects as regulation, fiscalization, taxation, strategic information management. This all has greatly diminished in a context in which tourism is increasingly a liquid social phenomenon, impossible to deal with as a discrete economic activity or social practice. Its organization and agency having become increasingly global and increasingly dependent to some extent expert visitors have become co-producers of experiences and places. So it is not as easy today to manage tourism and to steer it towards sustainability, and it's much more difficult to do it now than 30 years ago. And imagine if we couldn't do it 30 years ago, what is happening in this moment is even something that we really don't know how this will end. When we regulate tourists, we end up regulating ourselves. We are all tourists. We are ending up regulating our citizens. This is one of the biggest problems. If we cannot separate the life sphere of the tourist from the life sphere of the visitor, how are we expected to regulate just the visitor, not affecting the local population? When we regulate the tourism industry, this industry changes shape, changes operational forms, transforms itself. And we've seen that with the rise of peer-to-peer platform. When Barcelona decided that there were too many tourist apartments in the city in 2014, it put a moratorium on the concession of new licenses, and that's when Airbnb arrived. And the moratorium was absolutely useless to stop this wave of transformation or tourismification of housing into the city. Or what Amalia Poon called diagonal diversification, taking in sectors that were not previously conceived as part of the tourism industry. Make an example, bike rentals. How do we regulate bike rentals as a tourist activity when bikes are also used by the residents? They are very useful for the residents, and they help to solve one of the most pulling environmental issues of the city. Yeah, but when you have 20 people, 20 tourists in a group on bikes, occupying all the bike lane and crossing with the red light, there you have a problem. What do you do to solve that problem? You cannot prevent people from using bike. You cannot stop people from renting bikes because we are not treating that as a discrete economic activity just for tourists. So, and this is my last point where I give back the word to my panelists. My point is that refueling the policy agenda for resilient places in this emerging tourist or even post-tourist world requires, first of all, new knowledge on how tourism mobilities land in places. Point already done by Maria Gravari. We don't really need to know anymore how many Chinese visitors are coming next year. We need to know what they are doing to our cities. We need to have a methodological and also conceptual tool to understand what are the footprints of this great heterogeneity and multiplicity of tourist enactments of places. We need to have knowledge, we need to use resources in a smarter way, and we need to drive further developments knowing what is at stake exactly. And also we need, and that's what in this session, the jump I will try to do with respect to the previous session, we need a new political consensus, a consensus of policymakers at all scales on the future status of places and local communities in this world of flows, which also challenges dominant growth paradigms and concepts of multi-scalar governance. We need places that are able to govern themselves, tourist places that are able to do with their mobility issues, and we need a new consensus about what are the famous rights and duties that all forms of citizens, be it formal citizens, be it a transient population, be it city users, have with respect to the place they are treading on. So this was a brief introduction to this session, and now in the order I have here on my sheet, I will give the word to Professor Hariko Kostis. You can either come here, stay there, as you prefer. Okay. This is your slide change.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, the key issues that were identified, knowledge and political consensus, are also the weaknesses that we all observe and nowadays, and also they depend on broader context issues which have to deal with consensus, with how knowledge is changing fast. And so what I will try to do in the beginning is just have an overview of where we go and what are the big issues. Maybe just to summarize what Maria has already demonstrated to us in the previous session, for those of you who were not here. As we know, tourism is growing very fast. Europe is a major destination. The Mediterranean also is a growing destination, growing slightly higher than the European average. And of course, the outcome of this growth, the factors of this growth are essentially globalization, the expansion of markets, which leads to competition. And competition means that places have to be competitive. Therefore, they seek to be more active in seeking and attracting tourists. So this is one factor. The second is we still have an issue of geopolitics and safety, which introduces a little bit of uncertainty with the long-term effects, or rather not the long-term, but more or less the short and medium-term effects for some parts of our region. And but the most important part, what has changed our lives, is technological change. And we have changed completely the way we think. And if we look also from an urban planning perspective, the future of cities is going to be totally different from what we know so far. There will not be industrial areas near cities. There will be only logistic parks, with new technology, even those have to be, will restructure the way metropolitan areas are, and that will have an effect on the way we live. So we're just living the beginning of that. So, and this has an effect on tourism, which is essentially how we interpret and we practice leisure. That means recreation. What do we do in our free time? So that has also affected the change in standards, because we are globally, we're more and more experienced as tourists, so we're more demanding. We have learned from the accessibility to all sorts of kinds of information and knowledge that everything is there, but we don't have rules or principles of how to select what is right, what is wrong. So we're more, let's say, turning into ourselves as in terms of making decisions. So that means that we're strengthening our own atomistic aspects. That means the personalized preferences, and this is also has an effect on tourism. That means we seek to satisfy our own personal needs more and more, and that's how we started having in the past alternative types of tourism. Now we call it special purpose tourism. That means combinations, and they're so broad that it's very difficult even to plan for them. So we have to be, we're in an opening policy framework, and this is very, very interesting, because this is exactly what is the challenge of nowadays. And of course, we're searching since we're experienced, we search the quality of experience at the destination level, so the focus is more and more at the local level to come up with policies that deal with the positive and the negative effects of tourism. And of course, the Mediterranean has many advantages. It will continue to be attractive. But what is interesting in the Mediterranean is that what is interesting from the point of view of policy making is that there is not necessarily a very long tradition with institutional structures or ways of policy making as it is probably in some other parts of the world, Northern Europe or Central Europe. The pressures and threats are important. This is actually the logic of the emphasis of this particular session, to emphasize that beyond what we have known so far, which is the environmental impacts, and this was the thrust towards sustainable tourism, we have also the social effects and the cultural effects with multiculturalism. So this becomes a very fuzzy area for seeking strategies, what we have termed as sustainable development. And of course, a particularity of tourism, as we know, as a phenomenon, is the seasonality, which means that we have pressures that over time become more important than within the same year or even in the same shortened period. And this is how the essence of resilience came around, which was something that was mentioned. That means the ability, establishing systems of managing the problems with a long-term perspective, because that's what resilience is all about, by maintaining the structure and the dynamics of the system. So, what are the factors that affect tourism policies nowadays? Sustainable development is, of course, something that we have all accepted. That means the balancing of the three goals of society: social equity, economic efficiency, and environmental conservation. And this is the logic, the seeking the goals, but essentially we're still far away from making this into practice, because it's different stating objectives and goals than realizing something that leads to that. So this is something that is still at a relatively early stage, in spite of the long discussion about sustainable development. And of course, to this, we have added, as societies, new expansions of our perspectives, like climate change adaptation, meaning a long-term view which deals with specific aspects of environmental, social, and economic development. And of course, we have also the effects of the circular economy, which is a new phenomenon and something that we have not learned how to study, and much more how to manage, because these are the two pillars we said, knowledge and innovative policy making. And of course, that brings the issues of what can we do in terms of territorial cohesion policies, whether we can use structures, policies that exist at a European level to overcome or to assist in facing these types of problems. And of course, we keep adding new perspectives into tourism. I will not go into that. So we have to think, however, of a significant aspect, that places are different. There are different institutional structures, different traditions, different governance mechanisms. So it's not easy to transfer one from another, but there's only one way through collaboration to learn about what's going on and try to adapt to our own specificities. So that's what we try. I'll go over very fast to that. This is the policy framework that we all have accepted: integration of policies, multidimensional, flexibility, adaptability. Obviously, participation, since we're in a democratic governance context. And of course, what is important is, beyond stating goals and objectives, is to try to take action and also monitor this action and evaluate whether this leads to the desirable outcome. And this is very important. That's how indicators came around for a long time, and we're still discussing this, and the issue is how to build capacities that give, at various levels, local, regional, national, and supranational, I would say, the ability to seek policies and also measure their progress towards the goals. So I will present you very briefly what we did in the Co-Evolve project, which is a project about co-evolution of ecosystems and tourism in Mediterranean coastal areas. The idea is to try to approach the problem of seeking sustainability. We have started with the spatial scale. That means we talk about sustainability of tourism, but it's different if it is in Dubrovnik or if it is in Barcelona. Different scale, different governance systems, different problems, different diffusion, different pressures, different conditions. So we started by the logic that we have to select the appropriate scale. Actually, it is operated on multiple scales, but essentially it has to do with where governance is putting its major thrust. And then we try to introduce the tourism-related particularities. That means it's different if we talk about sustainable development in Barcelona as a city, and different if we talk for a specific tourist destination. So, and then we try to introduce the issue of typology. That means the particularities in terms of the type of tourism, the type of the area, etc. And in the end, we try also to introduce in the analysis the level of pressure at the destination, whether it is mature, whether it is developing, or whether it is developing pressures now. So in a sense, I will not show you the map of what was around the Mediterranean, but we developed a set of 3 types of indicators. about sustainable tourism. Of course, we have GSTC indicators, we have ETIS indicators, but these relate to global type of conditions and global type problems, and they do not necessarily reflect the Mediterranean particularities of coastal tourism destinations. So that's the logic of the Co-Evolve project. So we said, okay, we need a set of indicators. Since we deal with tourist destinations, a core system has to deal with tourism. The second aspect is the destination indicators. That means the typology of destination. It's different if it is a mass tourism, sea and sun destination, and it's different if it is an urban center, which is mostly on cultural tourism, etc., and different if it is an area with nautical tourism and port facilities and cruises, etc. So for the specific type of destination, we had a different set. And the third part is pilot area specific indicators which reflect the particularities of the place, because even if we have natural areas that are important and need to be protected, they have particularities, they have major differences, whether they are lagoons, whether they have different species, whether different dynamics, etc. So this is the logic, and we developed a toolkit, that means a method of how to approach it and how to select, and then from a part of the toolkit is a priority list of indicators. That means you cannot talk about sustainable tourism if at least you don't have a basic set. You don't just measure population or the ratio of tourists to population, you need to go much more. Anyway, and this is where we are, in a sense, the logic of Co-Evolve, as many other projects that we followed yesterday and we saw across, is that there is activity towards sustainable development, meaning facing the pressures and the problems of tourist destinations. It is an expanding policy area, and it is an area which suffers from two major deficiencies: knowledge and the particularities of the governance side. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this table. I'm José Antonio Donaire, I'm a geographer. I work at the Faculty of Tourism on the Universitat de Girona. And I'm afraid that my vision will be theoretical, academic, more than practical. And I thought I cannot contribute much. I propose you a series of doubts about tourism and sustainable tourism. First doubt, I'm not comfortable with the concept of sustainable tourism. Why? A tourist generates two types of impact. First, the tourist carries with him a backpack with environmental cost of the transportation from the origin to the destination. That's the first impact. And secondly, because the average consumption of a tourist in resources, such as water, food, and so on, and he also generates waste will above than the local average. That's why I think it's not possible, therefore, to imagine sustainable tourism. And I think it's a mistake to use this term also. In any case, we must consider how to reduce the non-sustainability of tourism more than propose sustainable tourism models. Second doubt is about mobility. Russo talked about it. I think we are also caught up into the conceptual debate about the limits of tourism. It is very difficult to set the boundaries between tourism and other forms of mobility. And I also think that this effort no longer makes sense now. In a context of increasing mobility, in a new phase of time-space compression proposed by Professor David Harvey, places are stressed by the constant flow of persons and goods. We are in a new nomadic society. For instance, most of the municipalities of the metropolitan area of Barcelona, most of them, have more than 50% of population working outside this municipality. Commuters. I'm the vice-rector of international affairs in my university. Now, the main challenge of the Catalan universities is to attract international students, and that's because Catalan students start to make masters outside Europe. Last year, more than 3 billions. Last year, there were more than 3 billion air passengers. That means twice as 12 years ago. Then I think we must understand that tourism is just a phase of a global process that is a mobility system which affect education, work, residence, health, culture, spirituality, shopping, and of course, tourism. Third is about the growing of tourism. It is true that a growing part of society has incorporated a critical view of the effect of tourism on the space. This is through a collective consciousness about the impact of tourism. And that has led to a social response in destination which require limiting the impacts of tourism on space. It's true, but awareness of the impacts of tourism is not generating a decline of tourism. On the contrary, tourism grows due to the combined sum of the increase of the number of trips in Western countries and the incorporation into tourism of emerging economies. Some make tourism for first time, and others do more tourism than before. The result is that every year, the international tourism market grows the equivalent to the population of Spain. 47 million of persons every year are incorporated to the international market. Then they are local responses against tourism, but they are not global movements. For instance, criticisms against plastic or against child exploitation change the behavior of critical consumers. They reduce the use of plastics or reject products related to child exploitation. But the criticism of tourism in the big cities of Europe, for instance, doesn't create a movement against tourism. The same people who hate tourism in the global cities are tourists. This is a big paradox. Even this Congress is, in some case, a paradox. This is a conference on sustainable tourism. We are here thinking about the impacts of tourism. But many people have moved from their places of origins to discuss about sustainable tourism. They are tourists. We are tourists. Then it's a paradox. We are thinking about how to reduce the impact of tourism in a meeting that has given rise to tourists and therefore their the impacts on the destination. Maybe one way to reduce the impact of tourism is by not organizing a Congress of Sustainable Tourism. But we think we are not tourists. Probably that's the problem. The limits between tourism and not tourism. The limits between tourism and mobility. Then another doubt is about NIMBY. We can imagine then two scenarios. The first scenario could be a stabilization or even a decline of tourism, of international tourism, due to a global awareness against tourism, or more likely, due to the increase of transport costs. Maybe. But the second scenario is an increase in international tourism. And I think we should prepare for this model. What will we do with 2 billion of international tourists plus will non-tourist mobility? How to manage this scenario? Local reactions are necessary, but we must be aware that the limitation of tourists in a place will generate the displacement of tourists to another place. We would felt into NIMBY process. I don't want nuclear plant, or I don't want a waste center close to my home, but I don't give up nuclear energy or stop creating waste. That is why I believe that the great challenge of tourism management is to combine the local scale with global scale. These actions are as important as global agreements. And the last doubt, my final consideration. I think also that the tourist debate is contaminated by the cost-benefits model, which leads inexorably to a situation of apocalyptic against integrated. Integrated describe the benefits of tourism, and they tell us about employment, income, economic benefits, trade, balance, or international branding. The apocalyptics counteract with environmental cost, gentrification, less of identity congestion, the destruction of traditional shopping, and so on. I also feel uncomfortable because it's not true that we can build an algorithm that allows us to establish a consistent result. How many jobs are equivalent to the destruction of a historical forest? How to balance it? How many cost? How many thousands of euros can we subtract the effect of the loss of traditional commerce? How many levels of identity equals the increase of 1 point in the trade balance? In fact, cost-benefit model is not an useful tool in this debate, and I think for many other debates where it is used. There are several alternatives: simulation models, carrying capacity, maximum thresholds, deliberative models, and I'm not sure which one is the best. But I know that we must abandon this black hole once and for all, the cost-benefit model. Finally, I want to talk about the confusion that tends to identify sustainable tourism closer to models such as ecotourism. They are necessary projects that describe ideal situations with very low environmental cost and social and economic cost. But the tourist tsunami cannot be fought with only ideal alternatives. We must do two things. First, manage the saturated destination. A reduction of 20% in the generation of waste in Lloret de Mar has much more positive impact than ideal artifacts that attract a minority. And secondly, we must prepare the destination for a substantial increase of international tourism and create new, much more rational tourism areas. Well, I warn you that my intervention would be limited to share many doubts and no certainty. Thank you very much.
Michael. Thanks, Jose Antonio. And now it's the turn of Michael Gralo.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so hello everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to show some results of the Blue Islands project dealing with an environmental issue threatening the Mediterranean Sea, the marine litter. And more specifically, I will focus this presentation on the marine litter generated on Mediterranean island, on beaches of Mediterranean island, as an effect of tourism. So very briefly, the Blue Islands project is an intermeg project. It gathered 14 different partners from 8 different countries, and it aims to identify, address, and mitigate the seasonal variation of waste generated on Mediterranean islands as an effect of tourism. As you can imagine, during the high season, the islands host far greater population, and this is a huge burden for local infrastructures, especially when we are talking about waste management. So the study phase of this project was divided into 3 main activities. First, So first, a waste characteristic study that we performed on touristic accommodation establishment in the coastal areas of the islands. Then we monitored the impact of wastewater on the coastal areas, and especially the contamination by nutrient of anthropogenic origin. And finally, what I'm going to develop now, we perform a monitoring on the marine litter on 24 beaches from 8 islands. So our starting hypothesis was quite simple. We thought that during the high season, the amount of marine litter, or if you prefer, the number of items discarded on the beaches, will increase due to the increase of visitors on the beach. So to test this hypothesis, we worked with 8 islands from the Mediterranean Sea, so Mallorca, Sicily, Rab in Croatia, Malta, Mykonos, Crete, Rhodes, and Cyprus. And for each island, we selected 3 different beaches with very different characteristics. First, a very touristic beach, which is characterized by a high level of infrastructure right behind the beach dedicated to tourism, such as hotels, restaurants, nightclubs, this kind of thing. And this beach is quite popular and received, during the high season, a high volume of tourists. Here, this is the beach of Golden Bay in Malta. Then we had the second type of beach that we call the beach mainly used by locals. Those ones are characterized by a low level of infrastructure right behind the beach, but they are still quite popular and receive quite a huge load of tourists during the high season. This one is the beach of Genoa in Malta. And finally, we select a remote beach with absolutely no infrastructure right behind the beach, and a low volume of tourists all year long. So for each beach that we selected, we defined a 100 meter portion of beach that where we are going to do the monitoring. For the monitoring, we adapted the OSPAR guidelines for marine litter monitoring to include the mesoplastic and the microplastic. I'm coming from an environmental institute, and we are interested with this type of pollutant. So the mesoplastic have a size comprised between 0.5 and 2.5 centimeters, and the now well-known microplastic below 5 millimeters. And in order to understand the dynamic of the marine litter through the high touristic season, we took into account during the monitoring, so the surface that was monitored, as well as the time elapsed between the last, let's say, official cleaning of the beach from the municipalities, for example, and the monitoring. So like this, by dividing the number of items collected by the surface and this time elapsed, we can calculate an accumulation rate, giving you the number of items that will accumulate per square meter and per day, for example. So I'm not going to detail results for all the islands and all the beaches. Just in 2017, so from February to November, we performed 147 monitoring. From this monitoring, we collected more than 172,000 items. This represents about 1,200 items per survey. That's quite a lot. And here, I don't know if you can see on the pictures, but most of the items were all partly or completely made of plastic. And actually, those items represent more than 88% of the object that we collected. So, briefly, the results. So here, this is the average for the touristic side, the locals, and the remote one. And when we just look at the average number of items collected, we don't see any clear seasonal pattern. And actually, if we only consider the number of items, it appears that the number of items collected is much higher during the low season than during the high season. And moreover, it seems that the beaches mainly used by locals are more affected than the touristic one, because here, on average, we found 2 to 3 times more items than on the touristic one. So if you only consider the number of items collected, in that case, well, tourism is not a big deal for marine litter. Actually, this is more the locals that are trashing the beach. But now, if you consider the accumulation rate, so this time taking into account the surface sampling and the time elapsed between the last cleaning and the monitoring, in that case, you see that first we see a clear seasonal pattern. So the blue band on each graph represents the high season, and I plotted in with the blue line the average number of tourists will come on the 8 islands. So we can see this seasonal increase of the marine litter, and this time, these are the touristic sites which are more affected by marine litter compared to the other type of site. And just to give you an idea, on the touristic site, it will take about 2 days to accumulate 1 item per square meter. On the locals one, it will take about 3 days and up to 5 days for the remote one. Earlier, I was talking about the micro and the mesoplastic. So we collected as well those tiny guys on during all the monitoring. And for the microplastics, we made the distinction between primary microplastics and secondary microplastics. So the primary microplastic, those guys here, this we call them pellets, and this is actually raw material that is used to manufacture plastic items. So these little guys here, don't have anything to do with tourism. Actually, they come from the sea because on the island that we tested, we don't have this kind of industry on site. Here are the secondary microplastic. Those one comes from the fragmentation of bigger items. And, well, this is the same process for the mesoplastic. There is just a difference about the size. And now when we look at the accumulation rate of this different type of plastic, we can see that for the mesoplastic and the microplastic, we see this seasonal increase that is not recorded for the pellets. So that makes us quite confident in our methodology. And the hypothesis is that actually the microplastic are generated directly on the beach. You have to imagine that a piece of plastic that will remain there for hours under the sun with hundreds or thousands of people working on it would just accelerate the fragmentation of the plastic and generate those meso and microplastics. So, strong of all those results, we developed an accumulation index to better understand how the beaches are affected by marine litter. So far this index is divided into 7 categories, going from extremely low accumulation to extremely high accumulation. I'm not going to detail the equation and so on, just that this index is on a logarithmic scale. So each time that you move from one category to another, you multiply by 10 the number of items that you will find on the beach. And what we can see, so here this is the accumulation index for each type of beach and for each island. And what we can see is that with relatively few exceptions, we have a higher accumulation index during the high season, represented by the black bars, compared to the low season, represented by the white bars. And for example, here in Malta, you see the difference, it's quite small, so it seems not to be such a big deal. But again, this is a logarithmic scale, so this slight difference here represents on average 2 to 3 times more item during the high season compared to the low season. And actually, we are now using this accumulation index to feed a decision tool, so that we are going to implement in the project right now. So within this tool, so you have all the islands and all the beach for each island, and the accumulation index. So the accumulation index, you can have it for all the items that you collected or for separated items. For example, here this is the island of Mallorca. And for example, you see the accumulation index for the cigarette butts is very high during the high season. So from this tool, you can click on the button scenario, and you will come up with a list of measures at different levels, so European, national, local levels, to help the municipalities, especially in our case, to face with this issue. And actually, since the 1st of June, we are starting to implement the pilot action coming from, well, amongst others, but with the help of this tool. And some of the measures that we took here at the local level were to have awareness campaign, to distribute pocket ashtrays, and to increase the number of litter bins on the beach. These are the 3 main activities that we are going to implement, but there are quite, we have some other depending of the partner, obviously. So this pilot action will be implemented from June to September this year. And in August and September, we will come back, we will go back on the beach and perform again marine litter survey in order to test the effectiveness of this pilot action. So just to summarize, when we are talking about marine litter and tourism, it's very important to not only consider the number of items collected, but we should focus on the accumulation rates. Otherwise, you might miss the impact of tourism on the generation of mine later. Then, well, this is for our institute, I have to say. We showed that there is a seasonal increase of the micro and the mesoplastics, and it seemed that they are directly generated on the beach, as I mentioned it earlier. And now we are in the phase to implement the pilot action, and we are testing this decision tool that we just created for this project. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And now I give the word to Carolina Pozzi of Region Lazio, Italy, and the Coasting Project.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to present you the Lazio region's experience within the Coasting project. Coasting is a capitalization project aiming at enhancing the effectiveness of the coast contract or contract de baie, that is the experience of one of our project partners, the Marcel Provence. And the cost contract is a multi-level governance tool. With this project, we are going to focus this tool more on sustainable tourism and transferring this tool in the regions of our partners. The cost contract draws on the experience of the river contracts. That is a tool for integrated water management with the aim of accomplishing the objectives of the Water Framework Directive. This tool has its formal structure in the agreement, the contract itself, that brought together all the private and public actors to commit themselves and carry on a set of actions. The Lazio region has modified the Italian methodology for river contract implementation, formalizing the participatory planning process with the introduction of the roadshow. So all the phases of the process, so the preliminary analysis context, the memorandums of understanding signing, and the midterm strategic scenarios and the action plan will be done together with all the stakeholders through the roadshow event. The roadshow is a participatory planning process that has its base on the mutual exchange between the scientific and technical experts and the local actors. So with the support of the experts, all the stakeholders are able to have a positive confrontation. The key actors of our process are regional authorities and municipalities, but also NGO and associations and entrepreneurs and economic associations like tourist operators and also citizens. This mutual knowledge exchange between the experts and the stakeholders are made through three types of events of the roadshow that are the managing board meetings, the public events, and the thematic focuses. Our target area is the Pontine Plain coast that is in the south of Lazio region in the south, at the south of Rome, that is characterized by the sandbar and the dunes and the coastal lakes. As you can see, the environmental values of this place is very high, but during the summer periods the beaches are very crowded, so the impact of the tourism on the environment is very high. The first two events of the roadshow has been organized in March and April, and the first one was the first managing structure meeting to establish the board that will manage all the process, and that is composed of all the institutional actors. The second event was the presentation of the project to the community in order to awareness raising and involve all the community in the project. During the month of May, we started the thematic focuses. The first one was about biodiversity, nature, and water quality. The Pontin Plain was planned with was a wetland before the 1920s, so the water quality is a very important aspect of this place. And the second one was about climate change, coastal erosion, and hydrological risk. We use this methodology that you can see, that is based on the grouping of the participants in 3 sub-teams, and then starting an iterative process. The participants change room every 30 minutes, and they are asked by the experts to identify criticality and values of the and localize on a map, and then think about 2 time scenarios, medium and long term, and think about what to maintain, what needs to be done, and what needs to be improved, and then what avoid in these 2 time scenarios, in order to think about a strategy with the stakeholders. From these first four events of the roadshow, the main results related to tourism pressure are, as I already said, the extensive tourist flows during the summer periods, but also the transport and infrastructure pressure. Because of the dune, there is a street that is very near to the dune, and it's very, very crowded during the summer period, and it's the only, there is only one street to arrive to the beach. Then another very important problem is the mechanical beach cleaning that is unrespecting the dune ecosystem, that is a very fragile ecosystem, and that is also jeopardized by the tourist unrespecting behaviors, such as walking on the dunes and don't use the wooden path. The main strategies that we reach during these 4 first events are related to the problem that I said before, that in fact the beach maintenance and cleaning without using the mechanical instruments, the deseasonalization, and the integrate the tourism on the beach with the tourism in the inland, and integrate these two types of tourism. Organize a sustainable mobility. And then another important aspect was to create a guidelines for tourist operators in order to explain them what will be the economic benefits for them when related to the environmental protection. So don't only exploit the dune, but also protect them. And then this method of multi-scalar governance that we are using within the project, it seems to be very interesting also for the community. Okay, the futures event when we will further analyze and develop our strategy will be next Tuesday, and focusing on historical and cultural landscape valorization and sustainable tourism, when we can further develop the strategy of the sustainable tourism. And then the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding with which the key stakeholder will commit to carry on this process and arrive to the signature of the actual cost contract. And then the strategic scenarios and the action plan and the strategy of the cost contract. All the activity will be done, as already said, through the participatory process. Then the action plan will be done planning the activity with the stakeholders, because one of the important things of this tool is that the one who sign the contract are also the one who manage and finance the activity. So it's important to plan with them. In order to widespread the project and get more information about the area and involve all the actors also who came to our roadshow, we are planning to develop a geoblog. The interesting thing of the cost contract tool is that it ensures a sustainability of the projects, such as a European project, even after the end of the project, because it makes possible to establish a governance model very rooted in the territorial context, that it's based on the management board composed by all the institutional actors, and the Basin Forum that is composed by all the stakeholders, and is the place where all the milestones of the project are shared with the communities. And then the technical secretariat that is composed by experts and as the function of writing all the documents of the cost contract. Thank you.
So we are running late, but we still have a last speaker, Gianluca Sava, Municipality of Genoa. and then we'll see what to do with the question time slot.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. I would like, first of all, to congratulate the Diputación de Barcelona for this great event. I'm so honored to be here. And thank you also to my project coordinator, to the lead partner, Instituto Valenciano de la Edificación, because I'm here as representative of the city of Genoa, but also on behalf of Alter Eco project. That's the reason why Genova is facing now the challenges of sustainable tourism. I received so many inspiring sparks during these 2 days that I've thinking about to change my presentation to make it longer, but don't worry. I'm the last speaker, so I know that I have to be quick, and my presentation, I'm joking, will be very, very short. Let me start with a quick introduction about Genoa. Our situation is slightly different comparing to other cities that have been mentioned this morning, like Amsterdam, like Barcelona, of course, our hosting city, like Venice and Florence, coming back to my country, to Italy. Genoa has been famous for other strength points, but till the last decade was not considered as a capital of tourism. Genoa has always been considered a capital, a maritime capital for its big port, one of the most important in the Mediterranean, and for being the capital of the heavy industries in the 80s, steel and iron national industries. It was considered the Manchester of the Mediterranean. But after the big crisis of the steel industries and national industries, in the latest 20 years, Genoa has completely built a new identity, rediscovering its hidden treasures, but also a new relation with the sea, with the port, alongside some big events. In 1992, we hosted the Expo, and all the area of the ancient port, the Porto Antico area, was completely transformed and redeveloped throughout a project designed by Renzo Piano, our renowned architect. He's from Genoa. In 2004, we were appointed the European Capital of Culture, and in 2006, we got the award, the recognition as a World Heritage Site of UNESCO for our heritage of buildings, of historical buildings. So all these big steps have completely changed the identity of Genoa. Now we have become a city of culture and tourism. We are aware that the number of tourists is growing every year. And now we have consolidated a strong position of second row city in Italy with a higher number every year, but we are still in a position of, we are not in over tourism condition now. We are aware of that, but we are also aware that we have to do something to prevent and to avoid the risk of over-tourism, because there are some clear signs in the Porto Antico area, in the historical center, and so we have addressed this challenge in order to prevent and to avoid this risk. So the Genoa case history, we have made, for the reason I explained, some big efforts in the city promotion, and the trend of tourism flows has increased. We have some strength points like the cultural heritage, but this is something that we have to manage and protect very carefully, because there is a list of around 80 palaces. You can see in the picture when we open the palaces to the public twice per year, we have to be aware of the risk related to the preservation. We have a beautiful landscape, and we have also a food, a local traditional food that is something particular, because it's a poor food, like pesto, for example, but very traditional. We have to preserve it. On the other hand, we have a very clear fragility of our territory, because we are strict between the hills and the sea, And there are strong hydrogeological risks. Every year we risk big floods, for example, and we suffered in the latest years the consequences of these floods. We have also a particular infrastructure due to our territorial conformation, because, again, we are strict between hills and sea. So the infrastructure and the urban mobility is something we have to bear in mind to preserve our local identity. So all this situation explains that we have to avoid risks of gentrification, and we have to coordinate our efforts among public administration, private sector, and citizens. We have understood very quickly that we cannot focus on a few numbers of hotspots in the city, because the risks for such a territory could be very high. So how to diversify the offer is one of the main points that we have in mind in our strategy. We have also a local working group between city administration, private sector, and citizens. I will come back in one of the next slides on that. Oh, what happened? Okay. Alter Eco project. A great chance for us to be part of this debate on sustainable tourism. Prevention, for the reasons I explained before, how to go on with the diversification in order to increase the duration of the stay in Genoa. The increase of duration will allow, hopefully, to move the flows of tourism from the center to the peripheral areas. And for the same reason, begin to relieve the city center in favor of other areas. Nervi is, for those of you who haven't ever been in Genoa, is the last neighbor in the eastern part of the city. It's a kind of jewel, but it's not well renowned and not well promoted abroad, and also in Italy, so quite a hidden jewel. We decided to make of Nervi the pilot area and promote this beautiful part of the city. It has a tremendous potential, but also high quality. Why? Because there are some strength points: the landscape, the cultural offer, because we have all the galleries of modern art there. We have parks. We have made a great work together with the local stakeholders. We have created specific tourist products with the stakeholders, listening also to the needs of residents, associations, also private sector and tourist workers. The proposal is a proposal inspired to the concept of slowness. So the slow is one of the main strength points of this area, concrete experience of the territory, and the curiosity, how to stimulate the curiosity of the tourists. So they could live one day more, they could spend one day more in Genoa, experiences how is the real life in a neighbor in the peripheral area of the city. Here I have a leaflet of the products. I encourage all of you to have a look or take some of these leaflets in the stand in the coffee break area. But I will spend 1 minute to explain how these products have been made and prepared. Nervi Riviera in città, so Riviera in the city for this reason. It's sea, but it's city as well. We have organized guided tours between art and nature and the scent of art. So a guided tour of the museums, of the parks, and also an olfactory walking tour of the flowers and the trees present in the parks. An experiential workshop, Nervi, sea tasting, so how to make a deep dive in the traditional crafts and trade and works. For example, the fisherman work, but also how to, for example, learn of the way to prepare the salted anchovies. The tourists can do this experience, and in a traditional cave just in front of the sea, they can have this experience to prepare the salted anchovies. Then the Sea on the Hill, Mediterranean Scents and Flowers, together with our school for agriculture, they prepare workshops for tourists in order to teach them how, which are the stories of this nature in Genoa. And also water sports, kayak, snorkeling, all these kind of products have been prepared with the stakeholders, and they are going, this is a clear outcome of the project, they are going on beyond the duration and the time limit of the project. That is normally one of the weak points of the European project, the time limit. The stakeholders have made the challenge, and they are keen to go on with this activity, and we are very happy about that. I heard a lot of reflection in these days about how to respond to the challenges of sustainable tourism. Our experience explained us that the participatory process, the participation, how to create a method, a permanent, a stable method of work with the stakeholders and citizens is probably the main answer, at least in our experience. As I was telling before, we have also another experience of public-private collaboration and work in a participatory process, the tourist tax, the city tax working group. We have a permanent group led by the municipality with the hotel associations, with the citizens, in order to how to manage the resources by the coming back from by the tourist tax for city communication, for promotion. We are being the first city signing an agreement with Airbnb. They are fully involved in the process of the how to collect the money and the income by the tourist tax, and they are also participating the meetings in order to. We have decided for a proactive solution, not a reactive solution. So we try to manage the problem, involving them in the working group. Also, experience of co-creation in other European projects. I would like to conclude my intervention, and I have in mind another concept of this morning. Regarding the connection between tourism, marketing, and branding. Amsterdam, it was considered as a successful brand all over the world, and now probably one of the main reasons of the overflowing in tourism in Amsterdam. We in Genoa have dedicated a great effort to the new brand some years ago. The new brand, it's Genoa is more than this. We thought that Genoa more than this reflects the story that I try to tell today. So actually is a city with a great potential, but we have to be very careful about all the consequences, but we are more than this. Thank you very much.
Luca? So, that would be the moment in which the question and answer start. But I'm afraid that you won't see a lot of questions and answers in these sessions because I've been warned that we could run out of food if we don't go fast. I just want to say I had prepared some questions, but I'm gonna put it on the app. And maybe you can try to think about it for yourself. I did receive some interesting questions from people in the audience, and I just want to mention one, even if we will not have the possibility to give an answer because it's a very complex question, but we commit to meet the person that made the question, maybe during lunch, and have a debate with that. And I'm talking about the first questions. The first question I have on my app by Tonia Kutsopoulou. Are you in the room? Yes, you're there. Who asks, how would you assess Iceland's strategy to control the number of tourists admitted per year? Is it a good or extreme practice to reduce tourist impact? And I think we could easily have another whole session about your question, because it raises all sort of economic, ethical, functional aspects that we could eviscerate and get closer to knowing more of this knowledge, these footprints and these political consensus that we are trying to achieve. So to be discussed later, because otherwise Giuseppe is going to kick me out of there.